Welcome. I don't want to take up too much time for Rabbi Kravitz, so I'll just say something quick on the Parsha, very quick, which is we're starting a new era in the Torah, a new book, Sefer Shemois. And Shemois, if you, what's the English word for Shemois? How is it called? Exodus, right? But if you, and Exodus is a very good name for Shemois, right? It's all about leaving Egypt. It's a big story, but the word Shemois doesn't translate to Exodus. It translates to something very different, which is names, right? Names has nothing to do with Exodus. So why Exodus seems like a much more befitting name than Shemois, names. Why do they call Shemois names? I mean, it is the first word in the Torah, which is how things usually work, the first word of the Parsha, what the Parsha is called. But obviously there's something a lot deeper. Right? Names is a very deep thing. Like the guy that comes to a couple that's walking in a bad area, and this two people jump out and they put their gun to the woman. They say, "We're going to kill you. What's your name?" And she says, "Elizabeth." So they go, "Elizabeth, my mother was Elizabeth. I'm not going to do anything to you." And they look at the husband and they say, "We're going to kill you. What's your name?" He says, "Harry. My friends call me Elizabeth." What's Shemois names is that even if you want to have Exodus, and if you want to leave your Egypt, and you want to leave your personal Egypt, you first have to know who you are. You first have to have your identity, and you have to know who you are, where you belong. And I think that's a very fitting message for Rabbi Kravitz, who personifies that idea of telling people who they are, reminding people who they are, and we look forward to hearing that. Every Tuesday night, we have a class here, but this coming Tuesday, next Tuesday night, we have a special printing of the Tanya with a special event in Nachlaot. More details to follow, but mark down your calendars. Next Tuesday, Tanya printing. And
Eitan Moore
Eitan Moore
is going to be there. He was the captive, which has come on. He lived in Nachlaot then, and it's going to be printed in Nachlaot.
There you go. Don't want to miss it. And without further ado, Shabbat.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for the privilege and honor to be able to participate in another beautiful event at Chabad of Rechavia. Always happy to be part of that. The topic tonight is a little bit different than what I normally talk about, but they are very connected. In fact, when I first got involved in Shlichus and was working at the UCLA Chabad House back in the late 70s, early 80s, one of the questions that I was always asked is, what is the difference between a cult and a legitimate religion? Because there can be legitimate religions in terms of their methodology, although we may not agree with them theologically. So, for example, I don't agree with Catholicism, but I haven't seen recently, in the last 50, 60, 70 years, that their methodology of how they operate is something that I need to be concerned about. So I was very fortunate in the early years of my working in this area. I met two great professors in psychology. One was Dr. Margaret Singer, who was at UC Berkeley, and the other one was Dr. Jolly West, who was at the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. And they were both experts in dealing with cults. And I posed this exact question to them. What's the difference? And they really explained to me that you have to boil down to the basics of what makes the difference between a cult and a religion that is legitimate. And what came out of it was that cults condone and practice deception. Legitimate religions shun deception. They don't do it intentionally, whereas other cult groups do. Cults usually feel that the ends justify the means. That's why a group like the Hare Krishnas, when they would pose as something other than who they really were, they would call it transcendental trickery. And the Moonies, who many of you probably don't remember, was another cult that I'm going to mention soon. They called their methodology of saying they were raising money for something that didn't really exist was heavenly deception. So that's the first real issue, is to whether you condone and utilize deception or you criticize and you stay away from it. The second category or qualification for being a cult was, does the cult use some kind of psychological manipulation or coercion? So the Moonies, for example, back in the late 60s, early 70s, they would intentionally welcome and meet students on college campuses, invite them to a free weekend, offer a retreat, but they, and this is pre-cell phones, but in the bus that they would take them to the event, they intentionally left the lights on inside the bus so they couldn't see outside where they were going, to disorient them. They didn't let them make phone calls. They never let them be alone. They always had someone with them and pointing out. So they were indoctrinating them. So that was just like kind of an introduction in my personal experience of what I still today think are the core distinctions. Obviously, there's lots of other distinctions, but this is the core to me. In the presentation for tonight, which is titled "The Power of Persuasion," what do cults and terrorists have in common? I kind of shortened the title. Originally is what do cults, terrorists, and marketing experts? But I figured it was too long, so I took it off and it would be too confusing. But you'll see how that concept actually falls into it. So first of all, we have to ask ourselves, what is that power of persuasion that a cult, and we'll start off with cults, could get so many people to change their way in an almost illogical way? And I'm sorry, I don't have a projector, but maybe you can see this. This is a picture of the Reverend Sung-Myung Moon from Korea, who actually performed a wedding in 1982 in Madison Square Garden. People do weddings, right? But when we're able to see the picture, there were 30,000 couples. 30,000 who agreed that he would choose on the spot that day who they would marry, and they all just fell for it. What enabled him to have that kind of power of persuasion to get people to do that? Or another cult that was very heard about was the Jim Jones cult. So the Jim Jones cult in 1978, we're dating ourselves, he was able to get people to leave basically the San Francisco, Berkeley area, travel to Guyana, and they named the town that they were in, Jonestown. And when he saw that he was going to be investigated, he got everyone there, 913 people, nearly 1,000 people who drank Kool-Aid that was laced with poison, and they all committed mass suicide. Again, so the question is, what possible control could he have to persuade people to do that? Another example of a cult was the Branch Davidians, and that was run by David Koresh. And in 1993, he had everyone in a compound in Waco, Texas, and rather than just surrender to the FBI, 131 people were killed. Some of them did commit suicide. Most of them were just killed in a fire that broke out.
My cousin was one of the FBI agents there.
So I'm not making the story up? Oh, good. Oh, okay. So in this case, this was something that the cults did to themselves. And the real victims were the individuals who were hurt and their families who had to live with them. But in terms of an attack, so to speak, by a cult on outside people, that didn't happen until 1985, where another cult that was up in Oregon, and it was run by an Indian guru named Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who had thousands and thousands of followers following his Hindu philosophy. And he was very into money. I think he had a collection of like 30 different Rolls Royces that his followers donated to him and gave to him. And when the local community, and this is probably one of the first examples of domestic terrorism done by a cult. When he saw that the locals were putting up opposition to his being there, he had his followers go into town, go into restaurants where there were salad bars, and they sprinkled salmonella poisoning on the food. That is a form of biological terrorism, but it was done by a cult that claimed to be a legitimate religion. Then, in 1995, another cult, which was in Tokyo, in Japan, was called Amshirikyo, where the founder at Time Magazine did a whole cover story on him about the cult of doom. He poisoned 5,500 people with sarin nerve gas in a Tokyo subway. This is the first example of a cult that used chemical terrorism. How do you get your followers to be willing to do that? What level of persuasion did they have? We get a little bit closer in 2001, something that we're probably more familiar with. Mohammed Atta, who was born in Egypt, he was an architecture student, son of a lawyer. He masterminded and organized the flying of the planes into the World Trade Center. Again, how does a young man like that, who had a potentially great life, career, his father was a lawyer, obviously they had money, how does he get brainwashed? What persuades a person to commit suicide and blow up a plane and kill thousands and thousands of people? I think the number of people killed in the suicide bombing was just under 3,000 in mass murder. So we see this happens all the time. And the last one I want to talk about is someone named John Walker Lynn. He was raised in an affluent Northern California community, Marin County. And when the United States Army went and was fighting against the Taliban, they found him in shambles with dirt caked on his body, his hair in horrible shape. And he had been recruited into the Taliban. So again, these are examples of people being recruited to cults. Now, there can be cults where they don't necessarily do anything against anyone else. They sit around waiting for the aliens to come because they're UFO cults. Wait for the UFOs to come to take them to another world and another planet. So, but they're not necessarily hurting anyone. But here we see a progression of them hurting their opposition and hurting their followers. So how does that happen? So the studies on persuasion talk about something that people are on autopilot. People get on autopilot and they stop thinking. The key here is there's methodologies to redirect the way people think and to get their cognitive critical thinking to stop. But this is not something that's unique to human beings, and it doesn't have to be manipulated by an evil person. It even happens in the animal kingdom. There is a fish known as the grouper. It's a very large fish. One time I was scuba diving off of the coast of Miami, and one came up and it was bigger than me. And it has a problem, the grouper. The grouper eats a lot, and its teeth are absolutely filled with junk. So it has this relationship with these little teeny fish. Those fish are called cleaner fish. And this gigantic fish that's always eating other fish allows them to go in its mouth and eat the garbage in the mouth, and it lets them live. So what happens? There's another fish on the bottom here called the plenty fish. It looks almost exactly as the cleaner wrasse. it realized that it could mimic the behavior of this one and get into the mouth of the grouper, and instead of cleaning the teeth, would take little bites out of from the inside of the large fish. Why in nature did the large fish allow that to happen over and over again? Because it goes on autopilot. It's so used to the idea that this little fish, the way it looks, was beneficial and had a symbiotic relationship. It let down its guard and it went on autopilot to allow these other fish to come in. And it happens, yes, obviously it happens among animals, but it has happened also with human beings. There is a good example of a situation where a professor assigned his students to write a paper about an animal that was on the verge of extinction. It was in the northwest of America. It was called the Northwest tree octopus. It was an amphibious octopus. As you know, octopus can come out of the water. This one would come out of the water in the areas of Washington State. And because there was a resurgence of bald eagles, they would come down and pick them up and kill them, and they were on the edge of extinction. So the professor gave all of his students assignment. You have a week to write a paper on the Northwest tree octopus. And they did. They all handed in their papers. A week later, after the professor had scored everyone's essay, he had posted everyone's score on a bulletin board outside the classroom. And the students are there in shock looking at the scores because every single student got an F. They all failed the paper. Even the brightest kids failed. Why? Not because the Pacific Northwest octopus doesn't exist. Even it's a total fabrication. The whole story was made up by another professor. He made a website. He put videos that he made that were fake. He had pictures of the tree octopus. He had everything. And they went immediately to that website. And they were on autopilot. This is here. It says it. I'll accept it as true. He failed them not because it didn't exist. He failed them because not one student, not one quoted a secondary source for information. They only quoted the website. They didn't go to the U.S. Forest Service website or call them to find information. They didn't go to the Seattle Aquarium and call them up and ask for questions. They didn't even go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has an endangered species program. They didn't do any other research. They just took the path of least resistance and didn't think. And unfortunately, this is a horrible, horrible problem that we're facing today. Where universities are just kids that are following what they're being told, and it doesn't even have to be about radical ideas. Students don't necessarily want to do the research themselves. I have a very close cousin who's a professor, he's retired now, at Johns Hopkins, and he told me his students, they just want, give us the test, give us the information for the test, and let us get out of here. They don't want to have to think about it. And the problem is that we're all, because people make these decisions without thinking, and we're all on autopilot. I'm going to show you a sign now that I want you to read. I don't want anyone to say out loud anything. Just look at it and think in your mind what this sign says, but don't say it out loud. I'm going to start over here. I'm going to give you plenty of time to read the sign. Enough time for everyone to read it? Show the camera. Over here. Okay? Don't anyone say it. Okay. Now, how many people read that sign said, please keep off the grass? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
First check this.
7, 8, 9. Okay, about 50% of you read that the sign says, please keep off the grass. But if you actually look at the sign a little bit more carefully, the sign actually says, please keep off the grass. See, the word "the" twice. And why do we miss that? Why do so many people miss that? Because we're on autopilot. We're so used to a sign saying, please keep off the grass, we just think it. We don't think it through, we don't examine. So that is the way autopilot works with us. And we're constantly being inundated with information to manipulate us. If anyone watches television or movies, you should know that whether the movie is using an Apple computer or a Dell computer is not by accident. They have paid the movie studio or the television company to use that monitor because it's a subtle way of getting the product out to people without them realizing that's what's being done to them. And in a product that's not sold here, unfortunately, Kellogg's Honey Smacks is an example of a cereal. Your kids are being manipulated in stores. Even here, I started Osharan. All of the cereals that are full of sugar are on the lowest shelf. Why? Because that's where kids see them. And they have these big eyes. The big eyes are looking down. They're always, go and you'll see, the eyes are looking up because it's looking at the children to make eye contact. This is a form of manipulation to get the kids. Not only that, if you go to a market, a large market, usually two things happen. The shopping cart is 5 times bigger than you really need because they want you to feel that you have to fill it up. So you're being manipulated. And the product that's the furthest away from the entrance of the store is usually milk. Because that's the most staple item that people want to buy. But it forces them to go from one end of the store to the other. So everything, even the placement of the foods, it's intentional. Is it unethical? I don't think so. It's just marketing. That's why marketing experts know what they're doing. But sometimes marketing can be unhealthy. So there used to be, I think there might still be, I don't smoke, but there used to be a cigarette called Camel cigarettes. Everybody remember Camel cigarettes? Yeah. And this was an example where they used a cartoon, one of the first times they ever used a cartoon figure of someone smoking a cigarette, rather than like a cowboy smoking Marlboro. And this caused such an uproar among parents, because they felt that it was manipulating their children to feel that this was something for kids. And they dropped Joe Camel, as he was called. So sometimes marketing can be passive, and if you know you're being manipulated, okay. But sometimes we don't really know what's happening, and it can be dangerous. Sometimes the messaging is subliminal. I'm going to show you another image. Don't anyone answer or say out loud. I'm going to ask you a question. Does anyone remember what this company is? You all remember. You've all seen it, right? Okay, everybody look at the logo for FedEx real carefully. Okay, I'm going to put it down. How many of you saw the hidden message in that logo? You saw it? Just raise your hands. Okay, don't you? Maybe you know it. Many of you didn't. There is a hidden arrow. An arrow in this logo, because they wanted it to subliminally tell you that they will shoot your package to the spot you want it. The X marks the spot. If you don't see the arrow, all you have to do is look at the white space between the E and the X right up here. And you see a white arrow. You see it? But you will never look at a FedEx logo again the same way. You see it? Right here, the white is an arrow. The in between. So, again, is that unethical? No. But it is a form of persuasion, a form of manipulation that is there to try to influence you to do something. Again, I'm not saying that all of that's bad. As we learn in Hasidus and Tanya, everything that created in the world that's klipa can be used for good or bad. So you can use manipulation and things, maybe it's not so bad. Now, there are times that people will take advantage of other people and try to convince them that they have supernatural powers. And once you can convince someone that you have kind of spiritual or mystical powers, that sometimes if a person gets confused enough, they could actually think, maybe this is someone I should listen to. So for example, I'm going to give you a little exercise now. I want you all to do it in your head. Don't say it out loud. Don't say your answers out loud. Okay? It's a little bit of math. We'll see how many people I can influence to think what's written on this piece of paper. I'm going to try to influence some of you to think what's on this paper. So, and if you have heard this before and you know what I'm doing, please don't give it away, okay? Would like everybody in their mind pick a number between the number 1 and the number 10. Don't say it out loud, just pick any number. Okay? You have a number? I would like you to now multiply that number that you just picked by the number 9. So if you pick the number 2, 9 times 2 is 18, you come up with a 2-digit number. Everybody have a 2-digit number now? I want you to add up the 2 digits together. So in my case, right, I said 2 times 9 is 18, 8 and 1 is 9. Add it up and see what you get. Now, I'd like you to subtract from whatever number you have in your mind, 5 from it. And now you should have a single-digit number. Whatever number that is, whatever number you have, I want you to think about in the alphabet what letter corresponds to that. So if your number was 1, it would be an A, if it was 2, it would be a B. And go through the numbers and come up with a letter. You should all have a letter in your mind. I want you to think. I'm telling you, I'm throwing it out to you with this piece of paper. I want you to think of a country that begins with the letter that you're thinking about. Think of a country that begins with it. Whatever that country is, now think of the second letter in that country. Think of the second letter and think of an animal that begins with that letter. And once you have an animal in your mind, think about the most common color of that animal. And boom, I want to know, raising your hands, how many of you are now thinking of a gray elephant from Denmark? Look at how many hands went up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 people. Again.
An eagle
Okay, but it's 10
from Denmark.
but 10 people who I got to think a gray elephant from Denmark. Now I see a few of you are shaking your heads saying, how did he do that? It's not a difficult trick. It is a trick. It's just a trick. But if you are in a position of power, if you are a charismatic individual, if you are trying to manipulate and control someone, you might not use this example, but you might use something that can convince people that you have some kind of extra spiritual perception and can do that. If anyone wants to learn how to do this, I'll tell them later. But there is another example that I want to show you of how people can be manipulated. And I'm not going to say the name of the cult, but there was a cult that was pulling a lot of people into the study of Jewish mysticism known as Kabbalah. And in these cases, many of the people were turning over a lot of their possessions and money to these groups. And I was contacted by a woman who was seeking help. She told me when she came to see me that not only did she and her family donate money to this organization, when her mother got cancer, they told her to buy gallons and gallons of special water that she should soak in the tub and that would heal her. Her husband thought she was crazy, and he went to the group and started telling them, leave my wife alone, stop asking our family for money. And they told the wife, he's not your soulmate. You should divorce him. This is what this woman is telling me. And what happened next? He went back to them and said, how come you're telling them my wife to divorce me? What can I do that you won't tell her that? He says, well, if you'll give us $100,000, that'll prove your commitment to our group, and we won't tell your divorce and to get divorced. And she was totally confused. She really thought the leaders of this group were like the most spiritually connected people. And it seemed that there were two things that I had to say to her. Now, she came from a very wealthy family, and she had earrings that were diamond earrings that were very expensive. So I asked her to take off one of the diamonds. And I said, would you give it to me? She said, sure. So then I said, I want you to put it in your left hand. Okay? She put it in her left hand, and then I said, for the purpose of counseling you, do I have permission to touch you for a second? She said, yes. She took her hand. I said, I want you to squeeze that diamond as hard as you can. And I want you to realize that it's your passion and desire for monetary things like a diamond that are causing all your spiritual problems. And on the count of 5, I'm going to remove all that spiritual stuff from your hand. And I opened up her hand, and she jumped up out of the chair. How did you do that? She felt something leave her body. I'm going to show you what I did. Everybody can do it to themselves. If you take your left hand now and squeeze it really, really, really tight, as tight as you can, and you take your other hand and you put your index finger and thumb right here over the veins, and you block the blood from going back into your hand, and you open up your hand should be white. See that? See how white my hand is? I want you to look at my hand when I release my thumb. See how I went back? What I was doing is I was pushing the blood out of my hand, holding it back by compressing the veins, and then I released it. But what I did is I didn't tell her what I was doing. I showed her that when I told her to open her hand, she wasn't looking at her hand to change colors. When I picked up the diamond, I released the hand, and she felt this flow. And it was purely a physiological thing. But if I had wanted to manipulate her, and if I had wanted her to donate those diamonds, I could have convinced her that that was me pulling the spiritual uncleanliness out of her body. And cults are experts in knowing how to do these kinds of tricks. I asked her, whenever she was really happy in that group, did you ever notice that they touched you? She said, yes, whenever I was really happy, they would kind of massage my shoulder a little bit. And I said, and when you came to them with doubts, what was the first thing that they did? They did the same thing that in psychology, that's called anchoring hypnosis. You're anchoring this feeling that it means something. So they were trying to get her to re-experience that feeling of being happy, even when she was having doubts. But they, in my mind, were extremely deceptive and extremely manipulative of people. So this happens in cults. It happened in that cult. She was still not convinced and was going through a lot of issues with this and confusion. She came to my home. The first meeting was in my office in LA when I was living there. She came to my home. My wife, Devorah, was there. We're talking, and if I would tell you, she was pacing around the room in absolute frustration and confusion over what this group had done to her. So I asked her to take a seat. And I said, I want you to imagine that you and I are on an airplane. Or that you're on an airplane. And someone sits next to you, a man sits next to you, and he reaches over and he touches your shoulder. You don't know the person. What would you tell him? Don't touch me. What if he touched your leg? Don't touch me. So I said to her, you mean to tell me that if someone touches you without permission, it's wrong? They don't have a right to touch you without your permission? She said, absolutely. Any part of your body, your fingers, your hand, any part of my body. Then I said to her, Why is your brain any less a part of your body than your hand? That someone should not be allowed to touch through manipulation and manipulate. It's unethical. And Judaism throughout Halacha talks about this. I recently was in a store and I was looking at a heater for the apartment. And I was just so confused. Which one do I get? Which size? Does it have a light? Does it have a fan? And after about 10 minutes, I decided I'm not going to buy it. And I asked the store owner for mechila. I said, I feel bad. I came in and I wasted your time. I didn't buy the product. There's a concept in halacha called geneva das. So you're not allowed to go into a store when you, I was really looking for a heater, but you're not allowed to go into a store and kind of go, well, how much is this? Would you give it to me for 30% off, 10%? And you never had any intention to buy it. Just playing a game. You're not allowed to do that. That's stealing the person's thoughts, and it's stealing their time. This is how careful halacha is about this. So to take advantage of a person's mind and manipulate it, totally unethical. But again, we're getting back now to extremist groups that start bordering on terrorism. We saw that some of the cults actually use chemical and biological forms of domestic terrorism. But sometimes there can be such hatred that, again, people stop thinking. Some of you may remember a wonderful Senator, Joe Lieberman, who actually was a vice presidential candidate. I was very fortunate, that's me when I was young, I got to meet him when he landed at LAX in a special airplane. I was volunteering as a police chaplain in those days, and I got to meet him. One of the things that happened, which wouldn't come as a surprise today, one of the things that happened is after this Jewish senator was running for vice president, anti-Semites came out of the woodwork. And it was just mind-boggling how much it was. So one of them called up a radio talk show in LA, and he said, these Jews have a book called the Talmud, and it's absolutely full of these anti-Gentile statements. So to go through all the statements that they claim exist, that are fabrications, that were put in by other people in these pamphlets, it would take forever and it wouldn't convince them. So I called into the talk show and I said, oh, so you're quoting from the Talmud. Have you read the Talmud? He said, yes. I said, okay, how many pages is it? He said, no, 100 pages. I said, actually, there's more than 5,000 pages. And it would take you 14 years to finish the whole book if you did one page a day. And he was silent. So I said, don't go around quoting a book that you haven't really read or you haven't looked into and you don't know anything about. So what I was trying to do in that case was get him and get the audience to start thinking, to question, to get a second opinion. There's a famous museum in Los Angeles called the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance. There was a situation where a number of high school students got involved with a group called skinheads. These are very radical, anything that's white group, and especially Jews. And this was their symbol of their being white supremacists. Okay? They threatened to firebomb some synagogues and a few churches. And they all got arrested. As part of the sentence that they got, they had to visit the Museum of Tolerance. And they had to have 3 meetings. One was with 2 African-American pastors from the church that was threatened, 2 Holocaust survivors, and 2 rabbis. And I was one of the two rabbis that they asked to speak to them. You will not believe the most pressing question that they asked us as rabbis. You're not going to believe it.
Do you have wounds?
No? Why do Jews get to have a special symbol on food? And we don't. You know all the symbols in America, the OU, the OK, star K, the Chaf K. Why? So the other rabbi, he took an approach explaining to them what kashrut is. What is kosher laws? How do everybody benefit from it? Even non-Jews can benefit because it's healthier, it's cleaner. Muslims can buy it because they know if it's meat, it's halal. It didn't go anywhere. Didn't dent any of their feeling. So it was my turn. I took a different approach. I said, how many times have you picked up a bottle of Heinz tomato ketchup? Every time you have a hot dog or a hamburger, you've picked it up. French fries. Have you ever noticed there's one of those kosher symbols on it? Probably never noticed it. They had no idea. So I said, how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people use products like Heinz ketchup or Lay's potato chips? They don't notice that symbol. How did you, of all people, find out about it? Well, most people don't even pay attention to it. Said, well, we got some literature from the skinheads, and it said that the Jews control all this, and that's why they get this symbol. It's a secret symbol. You might remember Snapple. When Snapple drink came out, and it had the Circle K, there were people saying that it was connected to the KKK. I mean, just weird conspiracy theories. But my question was different. I wanted them to think, how did you find out about this? Because someone told you? Did you ever question it? Did you ever go get a second opinion? Absolutely not. So now that you know that what that symbol really means because of what the rabbi explained to you, how do you feel about the fact that they gave you only part of the picture in that brochure that you were reading, and you just accepted it? They were on autopilot to just blindly accept what they were being told. And unfortunately, this happens a lot. One of the most amazing works that I've ever read on manipulation and persuasion was written by a British psychiatrist named Dr. William Sargent. He wrote a book called The Battle for the Mind: The Psychology of Conversion and Brainwashing. He wrote that book in the 50s. Back then, when I read the book, I was shocked when I found that his main study was on prisoners of war. But which war? The Korean War, where prisoners were held in North Korea captive, and the North Koreans were using brainwashing techniques to try to get them to denounce America, to give up secrets. And then he also did another example. He talked about John Wesley, who was one of the founders of the Protestant movement. And he used to, in churches, to get people so scared of going to hell, while he was preaching, he would have people hanging puppets of the devil to scare them. And they got so scared of the fact that they were all going to go to hell. And he would tell them, there's no way out except the way I'm going to show you. That they immediately went on autopilot and followed and went with him. Be the same thing that if we were in a building, and I was the only one that had ever been in the building before, and I had someone set off a little smoke canister in the back, and I start screaming, fire, 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 and I say, you know what? Follow me, we'll go through that door. Well, that door right here doesn't go anywhere. It just goes to the back. It doesn't go out of the building. But if you don't know and you're terrified by that fear of a fire, and I'm the person who has the charisma, who has the sense of leadership, and I tell you, follow me, you're going to do that. So he talked about that. The example I like to give was in a movie called Robin Hood with Kevin Costner. There's a scene in it where he is trying to cross a river. And Little John, who wasn't so little, he was this big guy, is saying, you got to pay me money to get across. They end up having a fight. And in the movie, Kevin Costner, Robin Hood, wins. And he's holding this big, gigantic guy under the water. And he lifts his head out of the water. He says, I can't swim. He pushes him down. He says, will you yield? Will you let me cross without paying? So he finally says yes. And then he lets him go and he stands up and he was only in this much water. He convinced him that he was drowning. He convinced him that there was no escape route. And then he followed the person that was offering an escape route. It happens all the time. And when we talk about cults, when we talk about terrorist groups, they are all using this kind of manipulation, offering them promises that the world is falling apart, the world is coming to an end. If you follow our path, you'll get to heaven, you'll get rewarded in heaven. I don't want to go into the details about what the Muslims promise, but there's all these promises. There's creating a problem. The problem might be the Jews are controlling us. We know that that's what happens, with our enemies against us. And what's the solution? Jihad. It's the same manipulation, but on different levels and to different extremes. But we already saw that with other cults, they can kill people. So why is it a surprise? That's the power of persuasion that they have. On a simpler level, I have seen with many of the groups that I deal with much more prominently at this day, with Jews who are getting pulled into some form of evangelical Christianity. I don't categorize evangelical Christians as evil people. I may not agree with them. I may not like their methodology, but I don't run around saying they're all evil. Okay, Hamas, I'll say they're evil, but evangelical Christians. But within their approach, some of these people will use deception. Jews for J, not Jews for Judaism, the other one. They quote Bible passages that are mistranslated, taken out of context, and even passages that don't even exist from Jewish rabbinical sources. They actually quote the Zohar. They claim that the Zohar says that the reason God's name is 3 times in the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is because it represents the Trinity. That doesn't even exist, but it's in a pamphlet that they wrote. But how would anyone know if the person hasn't done the research? That's deception. And where's the manipulation in those groups? When they tell people that the only way to get to heaven is by believing in this particular path. And if you don't, you're going to go to hell. When was the last time you heard a rabbi say, okay, follow Judaism, keep Torah mitzvahs, but if you don't, you're going to go to hell? That's not really the Jewish way. Use fear. The Rabbi would always say, the Torah says, Sur me'ra ve'aseh tov. The Rebbe said, if you're involved in aseh tov with people, then you won't have to warn them about sur me'ra. They'll just be doing positive things. So we don't take that approach. I want to end with one last story, which I don't know how much more time. I don't know how late we go. How time should we end? You have 10 more minutes?
Yeah.
Before I take some questions? I don't know if I told this story before. I'm going to change the names for the purpose of privacy, but a number of years ago, many years ago, I received a call from a non-Orthodox rabbi. One of his congregants was very concerned about her son, and he asked me if I would meet with her. I met with her and she told me the following. Her son, John, for sake of the names, came home winter break in California. And because it's nice and warm in California in the summer usually, they were in the backyard, they were near the swimming pool, and John gets out of the swimming pool and he says, Mom, that girl he's a student at MIT. He's a third-year student at MIT. He says, this girl, Andrea, who I have been seeing, we're getting married. So his mom, her first statement was, okay, John, when is Andrea going to convert? Because she's not Jewish. And he says, she doesn't have to convert because he became a Jew for Jesus. And I believe in the Bible. I believe in the truth of the Christianity. His mother then said, I'll make you a deal. I won't drown you in the pool because I'm so upset. But she said, if you don't convert, instead of Jews for J, I'll make Jews for Jeeps, and I'll buy you a red Jeep. He said, Mom, it isn't about the Jeep. I would love to have the Jeep, but it's not about the Jeep. It's about, I think I found the truth. I care about Israel. I care about Hebrew, and I'm going through with this. This is what I believe. That's where she called me. So one of my colleagues flew to Boston and spoke with John and Andrea for many, many hours. He called me up. He said after he was done, they were very open-minded. Everything that he said went in one ear and right out the other. That's how open-minded. The only thing is that John agreed is that during the summer break, he would look me up in California. To my surprise, he did. He came to my home, and he immediately walked in the door. He says, how do you explain this passage in the Jewish Bible? I said, which one? He said, the book of Tehillim. He didn't say Tehillim, he said Psalms. But it's the book of Tehillim. Chapter 22, verse 16. And he handed me his Bible, and he said, read it, Rabbi. And I read it, and this is what it said. Don't give me an answer who it sounds like, but think in your mind, if you were to read this in any one of millions of Bibles that are in hotel rooms all over America, that are placed there for free. The verse says, dogs have surrounded me, evil people have encompassed me, they pierced my hands and feet. I guarantee you that 80% of people in America, if they hear that, they're going to think it sounds like Jay being crucified, even though the great historian Josephus reports that thousands of people were crucified by the Romans, not just one person. And even in the New Testament, it says that Jay was crucified next to two other people. So why is it him? Because that's the most well-known. People are on autopilot. He's the most well-known person you've heard about through movies, through stories, through plays. So you assume someone had their hands and feet pierced, they must be crucified. So he thought he got me because I read it from his book. So I said, that's a really good question. Can I ask you a question from your book, from the New Testament, before we answer this one from the book of Psalms? And he was thrilled. Yes, go ahead. What's your question? I said, would you open up to the book of Luke, the third gospel, and look at chapter 14, verse 26, and read it and tell me what it says. He opens up his Bible and he reads out loud. Jay was going with a lot of people and he said to them, unless you hate your mother and father and brothers and sisters, you cannot be my disciple. His mouth dropped and there was total silence for 30 seconds. Then he said, it doesn't mean that. I said, fine, what doesn't it mean? It was hard for him to even verbalize and say that it sounds like what? What does the verse sound like? In order to be a follower of JC, you have to do what? You have to hate your family. He couldn't accept that it says that. So he immediately said, it doesn't mean that. I said, yeah, but that's what it says. He thought about it for a second. He said, I think it says that because you can fill in the blank here. You're reading that verse out of context. Not only that, you're reading it in English, and before the English, it was in Latin, and before the Latin, it was in Greek, and before the Greek, it was spoken in the synagogues in Aramaic, but it was written, in Greek. But so somewhere along the road, it got mistranslated. So I said, you're telling me that the only way I can know what the verse really means, not just what it says, is if I take the time to think critically and do the research to find out what is the context and what the original language says. He said, absolutely. I said, great. Now let's go back to that verse in Psalms that you were quoting. Can you tell me the context? He couldn't. I said, can you tell me the Hebrew? He said, no. So I said, based on your logic, the verse could sound like someone being crucified, and it may not mean that at all. We can only know after we do the research. That's why Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, said in the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, chapter 18, verse 17, He says, the first one to bring an argument sounds right till someone comes and cross-examines. And you always get a second opinion. So I explained to him that the verse in Tehillim is King David speaking, obviously. And he's speaking in those first 22 chapters about how he's being chased by the armies of King Shaul. And he describes these enemies as being like wild animals that are pursuing him. And in earlier chapters, like chapter 17, he refers to his enemies like lions. So when he says, dogs have surrounded me, evil people have encompassed me, he's talking about the armies that are chasing him. And when he says, they pierced my hands and feet, even if that was the correct translation, you could understand how the soldiers were coming with their spears and they pierced his hands and feet. That's how he felt so afraid of him. Then I pointed out to him that the Hebrew word that has been mistranslated as pierced is the word ka'ari. An ari is a lion. Ka'ari means like a lion. He says, I'm so fearful that even my hands and feet feel like they're being pursued by a lion, trying to rip me to pieces. So I said, unless you read things in context, unless you take the time to use critical thinking, every verse that you're going to quote me, if we don't do that research, you're going to assume that it's whatever you want it to say. It's going to fit the narrative that you want. The Rabbi told a family that I was helping that in most cases, the decision to accept Christianity starts off with an emotional need. And then the people that accept it for emotional reasons or psychological reasons, they then use those passages to validate their decision. So their mind shuts off and they're going to read the verses to fit the narrative that satisfies what they're feeling. So as a sign that I once saw near UCLA in a store in the 70s, it said, my mind's made up, so don't confuse me with facts. You know, you can go over and over. It's not going to convince them if they're dependent on it. It's like the person who think that they're drowning. I was a lifeguard in my youth, and I learned one thing. If you throw a life preserver to a person and you get them out of the water, you're going to have to pry the life preserver out of their hands, even when they're out of the water, because that was their salvation from drowning. And it's the same way. How do you pull someone away from a movement or a group that they feel is giving them purpose, that's giving them salvation? Well, first you have to show them an alternative. That's why William Sargent, in that book that I quoted earlier, Battle for the Mind, he writes that the best antidote to prevent someone from being brainwashed is one that they recognize that brainwashing can take place, that manipulation can take place, and second of all, they already have something strong that they believe in. To me, personally, being a rabbi and Jewish, that is understanding, as it says in the Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot, that you dama latashiv, as the title of my book that I wrote, that you should know what the answer, you should know the things that are going on, and second of all, you should have a strong belief in Torah and mitzvahs, and in our connection to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. And it should be that with all of that, we should quickly see that more and more Jews turn back to Judaism in a religion that encourages critical thinking. Someone was holding a beautiful Talmud in the back. The whole Talmud, the one that they criticize, it's all about questions. 20 questions on one statement. Why don't they just get to the point? Well, that's Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. And there are sources that actually say that one of the benefits of asking all the questions is that no one should come along and say, if they had asked this question, they wouldn't have made that conclusion. They kind of turn over every rock to show the possibility of what could be said so that they can say, we thought about everything. So our religion is a religion of faith. Our religion is a religion where Hashem is alive. I didn't finish the story with what happened to John, and he eventually gave up his belief in Christianity because we spent 6.5 weeks in the summer going through every passage that he would quote. And I did something really risky. I told him, I don't even care if you go back to the Jews for Jay and tell them what I said and get their answer. But come back to me after you hear their side and give me a chance. And he would sometimes go to them, ask them, the rabbi said this, and we answer it this way, and we would go back and forth. At the end of the 6.5 weeks, he came to me, he said, I just came from Jews for Jay. You know what they told me? I said, no. He said, they told me not to speak to you anymore. So I said, look at the difference between them. I encouraged you to hear their side because you can't shut a person down and tell them don't hear both sides. Hear both sides. Think. Be critical. The minute you tell people don't open your eyes, don't look, that's already dangerous. Well, he went back to MIT. I didn't hear from him for many months. And in December, I'll just end with this story. In December, I got a call from another family in Southern California, whose daughter, Jacqueline, was at Stanford University. She was a sophomore. And she was on the swim team. And before every competition where they would go to a swimming meet, all of the swimmers would form a circle. And they would pray. It's called a prayer circle. Not a horrible thing to do. And on 9/11, when I was a chaplain for the airport police in LA, and I went to the LAX airport, and we were waiting, to help families who would come to greet their loved ones who died on the plane, but they didn't know it yet. All the policemen asked me if I would pray with them. Now, I, as a chaplain and as a rabbi, didn't say anything inappropriate religiously. I just said, God Almighty, please. But we actually created a circle in the middle of the roadway. If you're ever with the LAX, it's a really busy road. And there was no one. We're just standing there. Football players do it, like in this picture, where they bow down. We didn't bow down when I did it. They make a prayer circle. So she joined the circle, Jackie, and they ended the prayer saying it in Yeshka's name. And she didn't say amen. The captain of the team said, how come you're not answering amen to our prayer to be successful? He said, because you said it in his name, and I'm Jewish, and I don't believe in him. So she said, well, I know lots of Jews that believe in him. In fact, my boyfriend believes in it. You could speak to him. And she did. Why? She did it not because she was that interested. She was being respectful. Someone who was an authority figure, a captain, someone she trusted, was telling her to do this. Was that unethical manipulation? I don't think so. But she was being pushed in that direction. And that young man convinced her to believe in it. And I drove down to San Diego to meet with her, spent many, many hours. And after we were done talking, she said, I need more time with you, but I can't do it now. So I said, what, next week, I'm going to be back in San Diego with my family for Chabad at my good friend, Rabbi Moshe leader, the Chabad of La Jolla. And he was actually, at that time, he was in San Diego. And we'll be down there. You can come see me when we're down there. I get home and I call Rabbi leader. I said, you have room for us for Shabbat? He said, of course. That Friday, we're getting all the kids in the car. There's a knock on the door. It's John, wearing an MIT t-shirt and a kippah. And he says, I'm here. I don't have any place else for Shabbat. I came to you. It's Friday. I said, yeah, but we're going to San Diego. He said, I don't care. I'll go with you. He gets in the car with the kids. And we're driving down the San Diego freeway. And I'm thinking, this is perfect. He went to the same kind of Ivy League school. He went through the same experience as her. He could share his story with her. It's perfect. That's all I was thinking. The whole Shabbat, the two of them spoke. After Shabbat, something unbelievable happened. Jackie was sitting down, Rabbi Leader, my wife Devorah, and I were standing. And Jackie says, you know what? After spending the weekend talking to the rabbi and speaking to John, I realized I jumped into this too quickly. I didn't think about it. I didn't hear both sides. And then she started crying. I said, why are you crying? She says, if I go back to school this week, how am I going to deal with all of my friends who are Christian? How am I going to tell them I don't believe like that? I can't explain it to them. So I said, why don't you take a semester off? You're on a spiritual journey now. Take a semester off and go to Israel. Rabbi Leader and I kicked him under the table. We're going to pay for your ticket. This is before birthright. And he said, okay, we'll pay for the ticket. And her face lights up. She says, I've always wanted to go to Israel. Of course I will. But what should I do? I said, I don't care. You can go to an ulpan, you can go to a kibbutz, you can go to a seminary. And she said, great, I want to do that. Then she started crying. So we said, why are you crying? I says, I don't know what to do. Everything I own is in my dormitory room. How am I going to even get up to school to get it? At that moment, John stood up and he says, Jackie, I have this brand new red Jeep. True story. I'll drive you up to Stanford and get your stuff and bring you home. Well, that's what happened. And the next week, I invited them both to stay in our home for Shabbat. I invited 3 other young people who we had helped return to Judaism from Christianity. And we had a beautiful, beautiful Shabbat.
Could you try again?
Please try again.
No, thank you.
There's more people.
Here are matches for thank you.
Siri, turn the phone off.
You'll need to unlock your eyes.
God is speaking to us. So anyhow, they have a wonderful Shabbat with us. Absolutely gorgeous. Amazing. And then after Shabbat was over, Jackie took my youngest daughter into the living room to read stories to her. My wife, Devorah, some of you know, is a psychotherapist. She went to check her messages. I went in the kitchen to clean up. And John comes in. He says, I got another question for you. I said, go for it. He takes out a small photograph and he hands it to me. He says, who is this? And I look at it and it's Jackie, who's in the other room. I said, wow, that's amazing. They've only known each other for a week and he's carrying her picture around. This is amazing. He says, go show it to your wife. I go show it to Devorah. Devorah says, what are you doing with Jackie's picture? I said, well, Gregory's carrying it around in his wallet. And we start singing matchmaker, like that. And I go down, and we both go down, and we hand the picture back. So we're very happy that after a week, you and Jackie have become close friends. Then he shocked us. He said, Rabbi, the last question I asked you before I left that summer to go back to school was that I want to be close to God, I want to pray to God, but I don't know or understand Hebrew. What should I do? So I said, God is multilingual. God understands any language, especially the language of your heart. Just speak to God as you would a loving parent, and God will hear you. He said, I went back and I told Andrew that I don't believe in JC anymore. She immediately broke off the engagement. She said, I can't marry someone that doesn't believe in that. He was heartbroken. Even though he now had found the truth, he's still emotionally, he was connected to her. He, in a moment of prayer on a Friday night, closed his eyes and he told me, this is what I said to God. I will do what's right. I will stay Jewish. I'll even give up Andrea, but maybe you'll send me someone Jewish like her one day. Then he looks at us and he says, this picture, it's not Jackie in the other room, it's Andrea, and they look exactly alike. God answered my prayer. The good news is that she went to Israel to study. He followed her, and they eventually got engaged and got married. And the happy ending, and that up to that point, beautiful. And most importantly, he worked for Microsoft, and I got all my programs for free. So I'll end on a kind of a moment of levity. I want to just quickly point out, both of these young college students were not emotionally disturbed, as we sometimes like to peg people who do something different than us. They weren't psychologically messed up. They weren't unintelligent. They were brilliant young people. But what they lacked was the skill when it came to this particular issue to do the research, and they allowed their emotions and their feelings for friendship and camaraderie to shut down their thinking. We're coming up soon to the yard side of the Alter Rebbe, and in his famous book Tanya, chapters 10 and 11, he speaks so much about how people have to learn. And then chapter 12, now we're studying chapter 12, which is all about the idea of abandonment, is the idea that our emotions and our passions, they want to control us. They want to tell us everything to do. They don't want us to analyze. They don't want us to question. But we are blessed that we have a godly soul, and that godly soul has all of the attributes of feeling and intellectual elements. And our job is to have the intellect and the godly soul control the passions and the desires. And that was something that, because they had never experienced that before, they were just swept away into this. And once you get swept away and you really believe in something, it's very hard to pull the life preserver out of someone's hand. The way to do that is by showing them the beauty of Torah, giving them answers, not being critical, not condemning them, not making fun of what they did, but by showing them the same love that they were shown, but in the same way encouraging them to ask questions. There's probably the most beautiful thing about Judaism. Ask questions. Don't be afraid. And with that, I will say thank you for having me.